Pleasant days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, who always manages to remember what I've forgotten. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
I'm doing good, Scott. Oh, hey, did you remember to do the
Did you forget what you were supposed to remember that I forgot?
Yeah, there was something. It'll come back to me.
Oh, I got to do my taxes though. Like for real.
Oh yeah, there was that email that was, oh Christ. Okay. Well, let's get this over with.
All right. This week on the show, we complete The Shining as we finish reading chapters 52 through 58, which leads us all the way to the end of the book. Everything at the Overlook goes boom, both metaphorically and literally, as Jack fully succumbs to, well, we'll talk a lot about that. And then the hotel, of course, explodes due to our Deus Ex boiler. Matt, what did you think of the ending of The Shining?
Well, it was great. I think we'll talk a lot about the ways in which it was not as I expected it to be.
Sure.
Because as I've remarked a few times, you watch 17 adaptations of a thing, you kind of think you know what you're going to get. And then when you don't quite get that, it can't help but be surprising. It's very, very well executed. And I think, more upsetting and horrible than I expected. That's like the main difference is a lot of stuff just landed really hard. And, it's a very heavy subject matter, which is the kind of thing that is easy to forget when you are watching, a spoof of it on some animated cartoon or whatever. But it really is very heavy subject matter, and it landed very hard for me.
Yeah, no, I look forward to talking with you about that because I agree. This is a dark climax for sure.
Yeah.
Let's get into it, Matt. Let's waste no time. We got a lot of pages to talk about, and I think a lot to say this week. So let's get right into it. We begin with chapter 52, titled Jack and Wendy, which would be an adorable title, except it's not here. It's not.
Yeah, that's true.
We begin this week right where we left off. Wendy, ribs broken, desperately crawling up the stairs and away from Jack, who, despite being stabbed in the back, is still crawling after her. I love the kind of open question Wendy has at this. Like a little bit later in the chapter, she says, how could he be doing all of this with a knife in his back still? And there's this real effort, I think, by King here and throughout the entire rest of the book, where King is constantly trying to draw this real solid line between Jack Torrance and whatever this thing chasing Wendy is now. That this person is almost a supernatural being at some point. That he's got this knife wound in his back, and maybe a normal person would have already collapsed and bled out, but not inhabited Jack Torrance, who is still managing to follow her despite all this stuff. And I think to accentuate this, Wendy at one point starts referring to Jack as it, not him anymore. But this is I think the motif of this climax for me, and the thing I want to spend the most time talking with you about is this idea that King is really pushing this Jack is no longer there idea.
For sure. I think this is something that we're going to be harping on a lot this week, for better or worse. The specific not Jackness of this hotel being that is doing the violence to Jack's family.
Yeah,
it really is throughout all of this, and it's pretty important to talk about, actually, because it's really thematically central to what the book is doing, or maybe what we thought it was doing. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, and I'll preface the conversation that we're invariably going to have with the statement, methinks thou dost protest too much, Mr. King. I have a lot of really interesting thoughts about this, and I'm going to pose some theories that I don't know if I 100% support, but there's a lot to say about this for sure.
Yeah.
So we'll get into it eventually. That's just we laid a little nugget, a tantalizing nugget for you folks at home there. And meanwhile, let's get on with the chapter.
Yeah.
We see almost immediately here, Matt, that this is something that I thought was really cool, that the hotel itself has almost kind of reached a crescendo as people keep popping out of doors as Wendy crawls by. We also get this part here where it says, dimly she could hear the elevator running again, and beneath her splayed fingers she could see that the carpet pattern appeared to move, swaying and twining sinuously. I think it's just really cool that like the hotel is reached its utmost actually and of life, and is now itself kind of moving and swaying, and it's kind of horrifying.
Yeah, this was one really great horror element that I didn't really anticipate. Speaking of things I didn't see coming, because the hotel has become a sort of horror funhouse in a very literal sense, almost like a Halloween haunted house where you've got ghouls popping out of doorways and screaming at your, terrified guest. And the hotel itself, like you just said, the carpet is alive, everything is alive. There's this blending between reality and unreality. And I thought this was great actually. Like this is really compelling stuff to me.
Yeah, it's horrifying in a very fun is the wrong word, but I don't know. It's just I love the carpet moving a whole lot.
Yeah.
So Jack manages to hit Wendy again squarely in the back this time, which, as we'll learn at the end of the book, manages to like fuck up her spine like really badly, actually. And it's, it's really interesting. I like something you said last week that had never really occurred to me. I'd never really actually thought about it, but you were like, once again comparing this to the Kubrick version you had watched so much, but said that like, in that version it's just kind of the threat of violence against Wendy. We don't really ever see Jack Nicholson's Jack Torrance hurt Wendy. Like I think he knocks her down the stairs a little bit and swings at her with an axe, but the change to it being an axe means he can't really land a blow. Here it's not just we're threatening characters with violence. King is forcing us to see them actually do it, and he hits her many times, including this hit, which really just completely fucks her up.
Yeah. I mean, King must have sat down and just brainstormed, like, what are the ways of getting hit with a mallet that would make my readers cringe the most? And he settled on shin injury, spine injury, and rib injury.
Yeah.
All of which sound really bad. And then, I think about it and I'm like, okay, Matt, where would you hit somebody with a mallet that would not be really painful? There's relatively few places. So,
Yeah.
Anyway, it's very upsetting to watch Wendy take these horrible injuries.
Yeah.
Like we read a lot of stuff where people get, cut up and stabbed and shot and maimed. And I feel like watching Wendy just get the shit beat out of her with a mallet as she frantically tries to run away and defend herself is just like way more upsetting than any of the stuff that I can remember off the top of my head. We just read Blood Meridian.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think this was actually more upsetting to me than the stuff in Blood Meridian. Now there's like complicated reasons for that because of like how that book is written. But just in terms of the objective quality of the violence, like King is really, I don't know. I think this is just a testament to his ability to make you empathize with the character and make you really feel what the character is feeling.
Oh, totally. And it's not just that like we care about Wendy, it's that we care about Jack too. And watching this happen is just like adds on to the guttural reaction to the injury itself. It's like, that's your husband. That's the man you loved. And it's awful. It really is.
Yeah.
Wendy manages to make it to the bedroom, Matt, but she finds Danny missing. This is a moment of absolute terror that Danny's not there. With no choice, though, she locks herself in the bathroom as Jack comes crashing into the room. She's trying to figure out what to do, and as she does this, she glances in the mirror, and we get this. The bathroom was empty. Danny wasn't here either. And as she caught sight of her own blood-smeared, horrified face in the medicine cabinet mirror, she was glad. She had never believed that children should be witness to the little quarrels of their parents.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there was just something that got in me that got a chuckle out of little quarrels as she's literally running from him, like after getting nailed with a croquet mallet.
Well, sure. I mean, it actually provides a little bit of like irony to like Wendy's awareness of her situation, because this is clearly a Wendy thought. This is not a Stephen King narrator editorialization. And I think that I think it's actually important that we're getting this kind of thing, because Wendy is despite the fact that she's basically running terrified, like she's a very active character throughout all of this, and we care about how she's feeling about all this. Like, it's interesting because we don't really feel much tempted to blame Wendy for anything that's happening here, but I think there's a subtext to comments like this and to the scene in general of Wendy thinking to herself, how could I let things get this bad? And somewhat taking that on herself, that this is essentially a conflict between husband and wife that has gotten badly out of hand. And wondering where she went wrong, basically, even though it's obviously not actually her fault.
There's something deeply like, I think ironic is the exact word about like just being like, oh, I'm glad Danny's not here so he doesn't have to witness this fight between husband and wife.
Yeah.
He's trying to kill you. Like, this is this fight between husband and wife that's going to result in one of us dead. I'm glad he's not here to have to witness this. It might fuck him up.
Yeah, I mean, on some level, she's saying, I'm glad he's not here to witness Jack beat me to death with a mallet.
Right, yeah. And I mean, like, this is the thing that I love about The Shining, the concept of, not the novel so much, is that she's constantly aware of, like, this idea of having to protect Danny from the troubles that they're having, from the thing that's growing inside of Jack, from all this stuff. And of course, the irony here is that Danny knows all this already because of The Shining, right? He is aware of this. And again, I think that goes back to one of the earliest metaphors we built out of this book, this idea that your children are much more aware of what's going on than you think they are. And The Shining is the perfect metaphor for this idea of this understanding that children have, this observational quality that children have to kind of understand even the stuff you think you're successfully hiding from them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I agree.
All right. So Jack gets into the bedroom, starts tearing apart the bedroom, looking for both Wendy and Danny. And I really wanted to talk about this detail because I love this so much. She sees him or hears him rather, like, destroy her record player, rip stuff around, and then we get to this, a dull thud as the mattresses were ripped from the twin beds where they had slept together, hip to hip. And I love that King never lets us forget this, right? This is one of those details that I just love, that he takes the time to say this. It's not just that he's ripping apart the bed. He's ripping apart the mattresses where they had slept together hip to hip. This is a monster in this room doing this, but it's not just a monster. It's a monster that looks like Jack, and it's destroying the places that they were intimate together, both physically and just like in a recognition of their love, that they slept like, this is chapters and chapters ago. Remember when Ullman looked at this idea of like, oh, we'll just push the mattresses together. He got all embarrassed by it. And now these two mattresses are being ripped apart violently. And it's including that detail, I think, is just really, really good.
Yeah. The connection with Ullman is really interesting, because if you view him as a kind of like witless avatar of the hotel, in some sense, in a very loose sense, then it's like he disapproved of that intimacy and that like purity of love. And now here, this, demon manifestation of the hotel through Jack is actively ripping that apart. I mean, it's great. I agree. I mean, it's a great touch, right? It's a great little detail. It's the kind of detail thrown into the midst of what is otherwise, you could argue, just like an action sequence, that really makes King's writing sing and land psychologically.
I so agree. It's so wonderful. It's a type of thing that I'm reading these pages and I'm like, yes, I love that. This is why I love Stephen King. I love it.
Yeah.
And now I need to read this section to you, man. I'll get your opinion on this after I read it. There was nothing of the real Jack in that howling, maundering, petulant voice, though. It alternated whiny tones of self-pity and rose in lurid screams. It reminded her of chillingly of the screams that sometimes rose in the geriatrics ward of the hospital where she had worked summers as a high school kid. Senile dementia. Jack wasn't out there anymore. She was hearing the lunatic raving voice of the Overlook itself. So what's your reaction to this, Matt?
Well, to be honest, the way Jack speaks in this point sounds a lot like Jack's inner voice when he's being a self-indulgent and whiny asshole, which is, a part of him that he has hidden from her. And so it's understandable that she doesn't recognize Jack in this behavior, but this has always been in him, even before he went to the Overlook.
Yeah.
So, and it's interesting because like part of I guess the reason why I feel like we should talk about this is I'm sort of caught in a superposition between like, does the book / Stephen King want us to accept this idea that this is not really Jack, this is just some creature that is puppeteering him, or does he want us to push on that a little bit and question and say, I don't know. I mean, he really, this just seems like all of the bad stuff that was in Jack, that had been in Jack the whole time, except given free reign, and all of the good parts sort of turn quiet. So it's not a totally different being, at least by my reading. I mean, there's enough ambiguity to it that you can read it different ways, but I think I just like that idea better, that it's more complex than just saying like, oh, Jack's just gone. This is just the hotel. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly why I pulled this out, because I agree with you. The idea of self-pitying whining and lurid screams of anger, that's just Jack Torrance. That is the Jack Torrance that we got to know throughout the course of this book. Now that's not all of him, of course. He's a complicated, three-dimensional character, but that's some of the worst parts of him coming out there. And I get your point is totally valid, that like Wendy doesn't recognize that Jack, because Jack tries very, very, very hard to keep that side of him as hidden as possible from her at all times. And so this feeling like something new, but this is the exact hypothesis I want to put forward, because I don't know if I want to push back at the book's seeming demanding conclusion that this is not Jack, this is not Jack, this is not Jack. Like it's like Stephen King is screaming at us through these last few pages, this is not Jack Torrance. And there's a part of me while I was reading that was like, I don't know, Stephen. I mean, I agree that that the hotel has fucked with him. Obviously, I agree with that. But I think you're right, that the idea that Jack's just gone now, and this is just him, this is just the hotel, and this is what happened. Daddy's dead. The hotel's here now. I don't think it's that simple. And I agree with you. I don't know if that's us, playing Death of the Author and reading into something that isn't necessarily there, or if King wants you to feel that way. I don't know.
Yeah.
We've got so much more to say about this as we go, but that is my central, I don't want to call it a pushback against the novel necessarily, but I agree with you. I'm just like, in this moment at least, that feels like Jack. And there's going to be a moment where we go into Jack's head briefly here in a couple chapters, and that feels like Jack too. It's the worst version of Jack, sure, but it still feels like Jack.
Yeah, it's distinctly not just, the Overlook. The text doesn't say the Overlook strode through its own halls in the body of Jack Torrance, or something like that, right? It's like you said, it's the most exaggerated worst qualities of Jack, but it is still that guy. And there's going to be plenty of other stuff that we can riff on from here, but
sure,
I think you and I lean strongly in the same direction, so we'll address that as we go.
Yeah. So Wendy gets some razors out of the medicine cabinet and begins to slash at the Jack thing as he breaks through the bathroom door. She cuts herself as well, though, because she's trying to attack with loose razor blades. And just when it seems like Jack will inevitably get through the door and kill her, Dick Halloran arrives at last. And that's kind of where our chapter ends here, Matt, with Jack leaving Wendy to chase after Dick while she loses consciousness in their bedroom.
Razor blades.
Oh yeah. Ugh.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely one of the more like viscerally upsetting Stephen King novels that we've read, where he's just like, how can I really like make people writhe in their seats? And also, I love specifically the idea that she cuts herself. It's as a literary touch. I mean, I love it because even in the act of defending herself from her insane spouse, she can't help but hurt herself, which you could take metaphorically as, there's no getting out of these sorts of doomed sort of family / marital situations in a way that doesn't injure all parties involved. You can't defend yourself from your raving insane husband without harming yourself.
I love that.
I just love, yeah. I mean, because the contrast, of course, the Kubrick adaptation, Wendy has a knife. She slashes his hand with the knife, doesn't hurt herself. But in this, every time they touch each other, Wendy is hurt, right?
Yeah. No, I think you're so right there, and that feels very intentional. I like that. Because
Cool.
she had a knife. I mean, it's currently sticking out of his back, but you could see a version of the story in which she just stabbed him with it, yanked it out, and then did exactly what Kubrick did in that version, where she slashes at his hand. But yeah, she does slash at his hand here. But yeah, it's a loose razor blade, so it slices her too. Love it. All right, we move on to chapter 53, Halloran Laid Low. And this is where we remind ourselves, Matt, that we left Dick in a kind of a rough situation last week too, didn't we? He's currently getting mauled to death by a leaf lion. So he's doing great.
Yeah, that's we'll check in on him, yeah.
So Dick manages to get the gas can from the snowmobile and douses the lion, lighting it on fire. He also manages to light his hand and arm on fire too, but puts it out before it does too much damage. And this is when I asked the question, how much, Matt, do you think the mittens and the jacket given to him by his friends help out with that whole situation?
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's too perfect that he is saved from terrible injury and possibly death by the specific gifts that he received from the allies of the White that he encountered. It's the classic Stephen King catastrophe where there's like almost always this thing where, as bad as the situation is, there's that one little crack of daylight at the I come to you now at the turn of the tide moment. It's such a delightful literary technique, and it's interesting because here it's played in a way where I think you could miss it, whereas I think King usually makes sure that you're aware of it. But no, I absolutely think this was intentional. The idea that the glove and the mittens help him.
Yeah. I mean, playing it that way to where you think you miss it. I wonder if that's like subconscious, where he's kind of building subconsciously the rules of his universe, and he will have much more awareness of that going forward, to the point where he makes it much more explicit when these little events happen. But then I look back to the idea that one of the things, when he does get smashed on the head by Jack's hammer, it does say that the hood he was wearing of the parka cushions the blow a little bit, just not enough, right? And so it's like he gets smashed on the head twice and he manages to get up and live. So he got a little bit of a cushion blow, which is a perfect White move. I'm like, no, I'm not gonna stop you from getting smashed on the head. I'm just gonna make sure it doesn't kill you, so you can finish the thing I sent you here to do.
yeah. What's important is the mission, Halloran. Get it straight.
So I wonder if he's conscious of this stuff. I think maybe a little bit, but I think he just later in his career wants to push that button a little more clearly.
I agree. And by the way, you can make fun of me now because I did know somewhere in my brain that Dick survives this book. And yet over the last couple of weeks, I kept saying stuff like, King is getting us comfortable with the idea of Dick dying via, the fact that he has the will and so forth, which I just forgot. Like I those are two parts of my brain that weren't talking to each other. I forgot that he survives the book, and then we got to this point, and I was like, "Oh, right, this is not the adaptation." So
it is really interesting the way King does this sometimes, right? Where like we've talked many, many times about his desire to kind of lay everything out for you, to where there are rarely like twists in his stories. He mostly tells you what's going to happen before it actually happens. But then he likes to do things every so often where the twist is actually that this thing that I've laid out very, 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 very clearly for you, psych, that's not going to happen. The other one I'm thinking of off the top of my head is the idea of The Stand, where like it was made very clear that one of the four people traveling to Vegas was not going to make it there. And that is like all the signifiers of that person is going to fall and die. Like I think the book even says he'll fall, and it allows the characters and the reader to make a conclusion on that. And of course the twist is that that's actually the only one that does survive. And so like he does like to play these games every so often, but he is still always playing with the central idea of I'm going to tell you what happens before it actually happens.
Yeah. Man, this is I agree with you, but this is like the biggest deviation from that pattern ever. Because like, it's, I guess it was almost too on the nose, the idea that he goes and gets a will and then he survives. It's like, well, yeah, he was in grave danger, but he did survive. So I guess the point was to make you take the situation seriously.
Well, I mean, maybe it's just an idea. Like, you know, we talk about King as this brilliant, you know, structuralist sometimes, but he's also a pantser, right? He writes by the seat of his pants. So it could just literally be, I was setting it up because I really thought I was just going to kill Dick, and then I changed my mind and decided that he can't die. So, I mean, that could certainly be it.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I think that maybe the ending would have felt far too dark if it had been just Wendy and Danny, you know, them being the only two survivors, and you know, that maybe he even did some version of the ending of the story that way, and it just felt too depressing and didn't really fit with the kind of sentiment he wanted to leave people with.
Yeah, you're right. That kind of ending would feel super dark and depressing. Stanley.
Yeah. Stanley, no denouement. Kubrick.
Yeah. No, the denouement is a frozen Jack the next morning.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Dick rides the rest of the way to the hotel and finds the rest of the hedge animals waiting for him just in front of the porch, but he manages to gun it and make it safely across the threshold. It is interesting. The text says here that he makes it into the porch area, which is too small for the hedge animals to follow him, which I get, but like, there seems to be like a magical line here or something, right? Like they can't like take a swipe at him or do the same to Danny when he like fell over on the porch and then just laid there for several seconds. They can't just, you know, just grab him.
Well, yeah, I don't know, man. The hedge animals are a whole weird thing because they're just distinctly not ghosts.
Yeah.
Like everything else in the hotel is at least arguably a ghost of some kind if you squint.
These and the book kind of eventually says the hotel, everything in the hotel is a ghost, but it is kind of an amalgamation of one central entity, right?
Right.
But are the hedge lions?
Yeah. The hedge lions are such a weird outlier because it's like, what, you know, there was no lion ghost. Like this is just some, the hotel can just animate these topiary animals for some reason. That is, I mean, I'm not complaining at all. It's a cool story element. It's just really interesting how, I mean, this is the kind of thing where I will always just give King reign to be creative and not second guess stuff like this, and just be like, yeah, he probably saw some topiary animals and had the idea of like, yeah, what if the topiary animals are like monsters? And like, it doesn't really matter to me that I can't quite exactly understand how that fits into the metaphysics of the hotel.
Yeah, can we just say broadly that King isn't great at world building in the way that a lot of people talk about world building these days? Like when people talk about world building in the modern parlance, I feel like they're mostly talking about like Brandon Sanderson-esque rules and definitions and understanding, and everything's fully thought and fleshed out to the nth degree, to where like even if it's not shown in the book, there's a story about this and a story about this, and there's a background about this and this and this and this and this. We've talked about this in the Dark Tower a whole bunch. King is never concerned with any of that. His rules and his world are very loose, and it ultimately doesn't matter. But this is another one of those things. Like, what is the hotel? What is this entity? Where does it come from? How does it relay itself to the lion and the dog hedge? There's no answer here, and there ultimately doesn't need to be, but it is just one of those things that he's just not interested in that kind of story building at all.
I think actively so you remind me, and we mentioned this tangentially, but since you reminded me again, I looked it up just now. This is a tweet from February 1st of this year, so a month and a half ago.
Okay.
And he said, world building is a phrase I really wish would be retired. Not only is it sloppy and lazy, it has become trite. A lot of the time, the world building takes center stage, keeping the story from being told. That's like exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, it is exactly. You were so right. And not to disparage Brandon Sanderson, because I mostly enjoy most of his stories, but yeah, I think this is just, that statement is reflexive of everything we see in King's worlds, like so much so.
Yeah, yeah. He makes the world serve the story, and then sometimes you're like, well, wait a minute, what about if the time travel that? And you're like, shut up, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Whereas Brandon Sanderson would always have the time travel be perfectly consistent, even to the extent where you're like, wow, this story has become just a little bit sterile.
And it probably explains, honestly, why I've just never really cared about world building to that extent. Like, I've listened to people talk about stories I very much enjoy, and say like, oh, the world building in the story was trash. And this is not Stephen King stories, about a different author.
Yeah.
And I was always like, I guess I get what you mean, but it never bothered me. And I think it's because I grew up on a diet of Stephen King, where even that I could say, I could totally see why someone looks at the Dark Tower and says like, these rules aren't consistent and don't make any sense, and it drives me crazy. And I could be like, yeah, I get that. I don't care though.
Yeah, so, I mean, people definitely read different stories for different reasons, or become fans of different authors because something about that kind of storytelling speaks to them.
Yeah.
I mean, I really do appreciate a good, clever, well-crafted world building, but not if there's not a good story there too.
Well, I mean, like, and that's a great point, because like, we both love Tolkien, and King loves Tolkien, and I think he would very much be, a world builder in the classic sense. Like he built this world, and then he made some stories in it. But I don't know. It just I feel like Tolkien's world and Tolkien's stories almost exist on different planes sometimes, where like you get little hints of them, but the story itself is just so good you don't need any of that other stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is a stretch, but you brought up Tolkien. I think a similar thing could be said about Wildbow and the Parahuman stories, where clearly there is a strong sort of superstructure to the world building, but then I think they allow themselves a lot of freedom in implementation within that structure. It's like for example, the nature of the parahuman powers is clear, but the individual manifestations of parahuman powers can vary wildly according to whatever makes the story more interesting, basically.
Sure.
And that's that's the way you want to do it, right? You want to give yourself a structure to play in, and then you want to give yourself the freedom to play.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think it is funny that like that is a story that is heavily admired for its world building, but that would never be one of the first phrases I would use to describe why I like it. And the sequel, Ward, was one of the things I was thinking about when I was thinking about the idea that a lot of people's criticism is bad world building, and I would never levy that at that story either.
Yeah, that's always a baffling criticism to me.
What is the city? None of this makes sense. I'm like, I don't know. It's a fucking city. It's fine. It works for me.
I don't know. Did you think about it?
Anyway, that's a total diversion. But I do want to say we did get a comment recently, Matt, that someone said they just finished reading Lord of the Rings for the first time and said that now all your comparisons make sense. So there you go. I'm
so happy.
You did that.
So happy.
Anyway, we go back to inside the Overlook as Jack hears the motor and rushes out. I do want to just point out a kind of interesting structural thing that King is doing kind of basically throughout almost all the end of this novel, where we're jumping between these characters, and we're always kind of jumping through time when we jump to the characters too, because when we jump from Wendy passing out in the bedroom, we jump to Dick in the past. And then we play out basically what's been going on with him during that. And then when he gets into the hotel, we jump to Jack back in the moments before Wendy passed out, where he leaves the room. And then when we go to Danny, we jump to Danny before any of that stuff had actually happened. And so he's just doing this kind of interesting thing where we're moving through space and time at the same time. And it allows these moments to like layer on top of each other in an interesting way, and also like see them from different perspectives. I really like it.
Yeah, I think it might even add to the kind of nightmarish quality of where time is going to become disjointed.
Yeah. So we are in Jack's head as he hears Dick's snowmobile ride up and decides he's going to take care of him. He drops some racial slurs that I will not repeat here. Decides he's going to go rush out and kill Dick. And he says this. He says, first him, then his son. He would show them that he was of managerial timber. That's like the most hilarious line in the book to me. He couldn't even like think of what to say here.
Yeah.
And this is another I think piece of evidence that says this is still Jack Torrance in here.
Yeah. It's a stupid thing to think, but it's in line with his whole like persecution complex.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, definitely there's a sort of, psychic finger on the scale, but fundamentally this is Jack's thought process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, he could have done this differently. He could have made it very clear that Jack was, Jack is just elsewhere. Jack is dancing in the ballroom in his own mind while his body,
place.
Yeah, exactly. While his body is doing these things.
You're right. And the idea that Jack's still having to tell himself a story here that like that he has to prove that he's of managerial timber, to me shows that he's still at least somewhat in charge too. Because if the hotel had taken full, control of him at this point, he wouldn't have to be telling himself these narratives, right?
Yeah, right.
Theoretically.
Exactly. I agree. I mean, that I will agree with you and say that this is one of the pieces of evidence for the case that we're making, basically.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're going to have some pieces of evidence that directly contradict the case we're making too.
Well, that's just that's what literary criticism is all about.
So Halloran bursts into the hotel screaming for Danny. Unfortunately, Matt, video games hadn't been invented yet in this day and age, and so he hasn't had it drilled into him from countless first-person shooters to always check his corners. He doesn't do it. Jack sneaks up on Halloran from within the elevator and smashes into his head. So he's dead.
Yeah, see, Halloran was heavy rolling because of the really heavy coat that he was wearing, and so he didn't have enough iframes. Yeah. No, he's not dead, but that once again, mallet smashing into head and face.
Into face. The face is what got me.
Yeah, me too.
He like destroys his jaw.
Yeah, that really touched a nerve, so to speak, with me. So yeah.
But I mean, I guess in this moment, did you think, oh, he's dead?
I at about this point, I was like, wait a minute. I know that he doesn't die here. So I think if I had not known that due to being spoiled by culture, I would have thought he was dead. Sure. Put it that way.
So having dealt with Halloran, Jack climbs back into the elevator and heads up to the 3rd floor where he somehow knows Danny is hiding. And that's the end of our chapter. Yep. Now we move on to the final confrontation, Matt. Chapter 54, titled Tony. I love this chapter, Matt. I love the ways in which King, in this, especially the beginning of this chapter, kind of mixes dream and reality in a way that you're never exactly sure what is happening to Danny in real life and what isn't. Like the chapter starts out in a dream. Tony specifically tells Danny he's in his bedroom sleeping still. And then we transition to Danny running the real hallways of the Overlook. And it's never exactly clear, when that demarcation point happened. And I love it. I love it because it just feels so weird and mysterious and dreamlike throughout.
Totally agree. I feel like this is one of the things where there's more of this general flavor of thing than I expected there to be. Mm-hmm. You compare earlier, Wendy's encounter with the ghosts and the carpet that seemed to be alive and these things, the barrier between the real world and some kind of, supernatural living reality is blurring.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of something in the vicinity of like the Territories or like Todash, where there's a barrier to some other realm that is being softened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I like that. I like that a lot. So Danny is wandering the halls of the Overlook, maybe in his dreams, maybe not. And Tony is once again calling out to him. Tony tells him here that his mother is going to be seriously hurt, perhaps killed. And I love this reaction so much, Matt. It's a little long, but I'm going to read it all. No, he cried out in distant grief, a terror that seemed damped by those dreamy, dreary surroundings. Nonetheless, death images came to him. Dead frog plastered to the turnpike like a grisly stamp. Dad's broken watch lying on top of a box of junk to be thrown out. Gravestones with a dead person under every one. Dead Jay by the telephone pole. The cold junk mommy scraped off the plates and down the dark maw of the garbage disposal. Yet he could not equate those simple symbols with the shifting, complex reality of his mother. She satisfied his childish definition of eternity. She had been when he was not. She would continue to be when he was not again. He could accept the possibility of his own death. He had dealt with that since the encounter in room 217. But not hers. Not Daddy's. Not ever. I love that. I love that so much. This once again, King manages to perfectly capture what I feel like it feels to be a child and put it in words that a child could obviously never describe, but it feels right, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this has always been the most impressive thing about King. It's sort of twofold happening right here. Like, one of them is this deep connection with what it was like to be a child that you see so rarely, but he does so well and so consistently. And then also just like an unflinching willingness to face really powerful, terrible, strong feelings. Like, there's, in a sense, there's nothing that would be an exaggeration, but there are a few there's almost nothing that a child feels more strongly than the fear upon learning about their parents' mortality. Like, I've had at least one of my children sob upon learning, death exists, and then making the connection to, wait a minute, everyone dies. Mommy and daddy are part of everyone.
Yeah.
And of course, not really being able to help them very much with that. I mean, I did my best, obviously, but the point is, these are feelings that we may have all had, and then we have all buried and never thought about again. And King is willing to go there and like you just said, walk through that very clearly and beautifully.
Yeah, and again, I think the thing that I love about it is kind of what you said. The realization of that comes to, oh, mommy and daddy are gonna die. It is almost never, oh, I'm gonna die. Like,
Yeah.
he's just like, yeah, I could die. I've dealt with that. But this person is immutable. Like, the phrase, she had been when he was not, she would continue to be when he was not again. Like, it's such childish, simple logic that makes complete sense to me why someone would think that.
Yeah.
I have never existed in a world in which my parents weren't in it, because I was born into a world in which they were literally my entire world. And so the idea that they would leave that world is something I could not even begin to comprehend. It's so good, and it's just so simply and beautifully explained here. I love it.
Yeah. And it's like respectful of like a child's psyche, because there's no aspect of this. It's like talking down to Danny as like, well, as a stupid 5-year-old, of course he thought this with his idiot baby brain. It's like, no, he's a fully fleshed out being. And his feelings are just as strong as ours.
Yeah, and I love the death images that come to him too, because some of them it is actual death, like like a frog, a gravestone, a dead bird he saw. But then the other ones that I love so much is Daddy's broken watch lying on top of a box of junk, like the death of some cherished object that used to work and is now broken, or the dirty junk that mommy scrapes off the plates, like this thing that is leaving our life and going to some mysterious place that I don't fully understand. It's this wonderful mix of images that I like. You could take those two out and the message would still get there, but it allows for the reinforcement of Danny's innate childishness to really come through there. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, who among us has not wept over the loss of a couch?
Depends on the couch. We got a couch in this room I'm laying in that we've been wanting to get rid of for 5 years, but we just haven't. It hasn't been worth buying a new couch for.
You better get rid of it before Logan forms an attachment, because
We'll do. That's gonna be soon, because he's already sitting on the couch watching Miss Rachel on YouTube. So
yeah, there you go.
We'll deal with that. So Tony tells Danny that he's deep inside his own mind, and I really like this, Matt. You're deep down in yourself, in a place where nothing comes through. We're alone here for a little while, Danny. This is an overlook where no one can ever come. No clocks work here, none of the keys fit them, and they can never be wound up. The doors have never been opened, and no one has ever stayed in the rooms. But you can't stay long, because it's coming. I love this idea of Danny's mind being an overlook. Like, there's the Overlook Hotel as a place, and then Danny has his own version of like, it's such charged imagery to say this is not just a safe space. It's not just like a mind palace that King has talked about in other stories. Our wonderful review of the Dreamcatcher movie comes to mind. But but to call it an overlook is really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, it once again kind of reminds me of a lot of the Toadash stuff from King's other novels, where it's not necessarily a good thing. That like the Shining in general is not necessarily a good thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it. Speaking of King's world building, I do think it. What is the Overlook? Well, it's this place, this mystical, magical place that exists here, and Danny, with his power, is able to create one of his own. Like, so you can kind of extrapolate from there and say, well, what's the origin of this? Where'd it come from? You can ponder, and the book offers you no answers, but I think these little pieces allow you to build your own world a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, Matt, it's finally revealed directly to Danny that the it that was chasing him through his dreams this whole book is Daddy. Daddy is the one that's coming. So we've seen like him walk right up to this line several times, but this is the time where he finally has to face it.
Yeah, I guess that makes it hit all the harder because, I think on some subconscious level he knew this, but he could never accept it as a tiny 5-year-old boy. He could not look at it directly. But now there's no choice.
But again, Matt, we get this beat of, but it's not really Daddy though. It says here, somewhere it was coming from. It was hiding behind Daddy's face. It was imitating Daddy's voice. It was wearing Daddy's clothes, but it was not his daddy. It was not his daddy. So the book really wants to hit you over the head with this, Matt. But
yeah, I mean, you could. So look, at this point, I just have to admit, like, I have a strong opinion about this, right? So I'm going to be biased in this direction, but it's like the way I see this kind of stuff is like, well, this is what Danny thinks. Danny can't accept that his father has this seed of evil inside of him, that he has this streak of pride that has totally corrupted him, and that he has this weakness that has allowed that corruption to, grow and grow and grow with, minimal resistance over the course of months. Can't accept that. So he just has to say, no, that's not my daddy. My daddy is a big, strong, brave man who has no flaws.
Yeah.
And that's a totally normal thing for a 5-year-old to think.
Yeah.
Which
is not to say that there's not like an entity that's manipulating and pushing and possibly even possessing Jack Torrance at this very moment, right? I think I want to make that clear. I think the ending of the book, as we'll get to it, makes that clear as well. But I think I agree with you. This insistence that King's text so far, that it is very cut and dry, that it is binary, that Jack Torrance is gone, this thing is the only thing left, is just not true. Like this idea of it was not his daddy. I know you want to believe that, Danny, but it is still.
Yeah. I think, it's just like parenthetically, I want to confront like why I think I feel strongly about this. Cause like, I feel strongly that a person should take responsibility for themselves and their actions. Yeah. And like, if I lose my temper and snap at my kids, I think it's really bad for me to tell either them or myself that wasn't really me. It's like, no, that was me. I screwed up in that moment. What can I do to try not to do that sort of thing or to react that way in that kind of situation again? How can I avoid this going forward or work to avoid this? Maybe it's too much to ask that a person never, ever snap. But you can do better. You can always do better. And to do that, the first step is to take responsibility for it, right? So like the idea, I find it borderline repugnant, the idea that we're just saying, no, it's not Jack's fault. It's like it clearly is. The whole book was building up the idea that this is who Jack is inside. He has this pride, this horrible attitude about his life. Yeah. And this is the consequence of that. This is the direct consequence of his internal mental picture of the world.
And there might be a foreign substance that, external to you, that can come inside you and take control of you. The hotel, alcohol, these might be things that do exist, right? But ultimately, it's still you. that this substance, you consume alcohol and you become a different person, a person that you're not normally, and it makes you do things that you wouldn't normally do. Sure, but ultimately it's still you. And yeah, I mean, this is the weirdness I feel, is that there's moments in this ending where it really feels like the book is very, very, very specifically trying to get me to say, oh, well, this isn't Jack's fault. This is the disease's fault, or this is the hotel's fault, And I instinctively want to push back against that, because yeah, I think the metaphor works beautifully, as you have allowed a foreign substance into your body that has destroyed you, but ultimately it's still you.
Yeah, and crucially, Jack was the one who had to make that decision to allow the substance in.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, until we get to a part of the book that seems to contradict that, but okay, we'll get there in a second.
Yep.
So for the first time, Danny gets a good look at Tony, and we see what you already guessed, Matt. He looks like an older Danny Torrance, 10 years roughly older, and we learn that his name is Daniel Anthony Torrance. Once again, you called it. So the question I have for you here now, who is Tony?
I mean, I think that Tony is just Danny's subconscious, like somehow having to adjust to its connection with this overwhelmingly powerful conduit of spiritual energy, and somehow metabolizing it into something that a kid can handle. I don't know. I mean, that answer I just gave doesn't really explain why he appears to be 10 years older specifically.
Well, Matt, it's because 18-year-old Danny is astrally projecting himself back to young Danny to help him out.
I mean, I can't really tell if you're joking, because that is possible.
It's a theory that I've read online that I don't agree with, but yes, that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's like this is, a Dark Tower adjacent story in a sense. So sure, we're allowed to do that sort of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't love that. Just thematically, I think it's like, well, it's more than I'm just like, okay, even if that were true, even if King were to be like, yep, that's what it is, I would just kind of be like, okay.
No, I mean, he's older because he's a version of Danny that is able to understand and comprehend the horrible things that are happening to him. And so the version of himself that he is building from his subconscious to aid him in these moments is a version of himself that's older and able to comprehend. That makes perfect sense to me. So
yeah, sure. I like your explanation. Makes perfect sense thematically and narratively. So I'm gonna go with that.
Nope, astral projection.
Yeah. This stuff does make me think about like the rules of the cosmos. And by this stuff, I guess I just mean like this whole section where Danny is sort of swimming in this nether realm of his shining, mm-hmm. where like we learned in the Dark Tower basically that like the rules of the cosmos used to run on magic, and then they became like increasingly more rationalistic and almost mechanistic with time.
Sure.
I was thinking about like, what is the shining? What is the touch, as they call it in the other stories? And I'm like, well, I think this is just like the magic that used to be everywhere. Like this is humanity's connection to that magic, and it's very rare and it's much weaker now. But you see, Dan Torrance is considered to be one of the most powerful shining people in this cosmos, and so mm-hmm. like you see what he can do. He can practically like warp reality, or at least his power can be leveraged to warp reality. And it's like, well, that kind of makes sense to me if you view the shining as this kind of magic.
Yeah. No, I like that.
And I just never really thought about the shine that way. So I enjoy that connection in this book.
I do too, for sure. So Tony reminds Danny that he will remember what his dad has forgotten, and then he disappears, and our final chase is on. As Danny runs through the hotel, it begins to pull out all the stops. We got blood on the walls, we got ghosts. But again, Matt, none of this touches him. Seemingly can't touch him. I mean, each time Danny sees one of these ghosts or images, he declares it a false face, not real. He screams at it, and the ghosts either go away or just leave him alone. And this causes me once again, Matt, to ask the question, can the Overlook Hotel physically hurt Danny? If the answer is no, that's interesting. If the answer is yes, why is Jack necessary for any of this?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it might have been able to hurt him if he wasn't aware that it was essentially using his own strength against him. But now that he understands that, what's happening, he can stop it from hurting him with what he now understands to be magical hallucinations.
Sure, he's like putting up to video gamify this. He's putting up like mind shields.
Yeah, exactly.
That is able to repel. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but
because I mean, we have the events of 217. That he had marks on his neck. Something physically harmed him in that room. So yeah, it's all so nebulous.
I'm really straining to think, like, my favorite thing about this story is you can sort of strip away this layer of supernatural and say, like, well, what are the scary things about the situation outside of a supernatural context? And it's like, well, there's a lot of scary things about, living in a scary, windy, empty hotel. And there's a lot of scary things about your imagination as a child, but none of those things can actually hurt you, even though they feel just as scary as anything else. But what can hurt you is the flesh and blood parents, or people around you. I don't know. That doesn't necessarily feel super strong to me, but I do want to answer your question. Like why in a sense, why bother with all of the theater if it had to be Jack to do it in the first place? Like, why have the hedge animals?
Is your answer another question?
What was sort of like within the frame of the narrative, like, why bother with the whole hedge animals thing if it had to be Jack that killed him? And I guess I fall back on the idea that it wants him to be frightened, like it feeds on that.
Yeah, we had a commenter say, similar to how Dendelo fed on laughter, that this thing could feed on fear.
Sure.
So possible. Yeah. I don't know. But again, does it need Jack? Like, it's so. I mean, obviously, you're right that the central thing is the metaphor of the real horrors, the real scary thing are the human monsters that can harm us. And that's what Jack is, for sure.
Yeah.
So Danny continues to run until he has an idea. He can hide up in the attic. Except his daddy locked the attic with a padlock after putting down some rat traps up there to make sure that Danny doesn't get up there because it's not safe. So Danny suddenly finds himself cornered and is just has to wait for his dad to come get him.
So this is a great example of a sort of terrible, bittersweet poignancy that was scattered throughout this section, this whole part, where you're smacked in the face with the irony that the reason Danny's locked out of the attic is due to Jack's responsible parenting, locking the attic intentionally so that Danny couldn't wander around and possibly get hurt by the rat traps or the rat poison or whatever.
Yeah.
Thus leaving Danny at the mercy of Jack. So it's just I guess it's this horrible, tragic contrast between the love and now the madness of Jack.
Yeah, the two parts of this person that the book is now drawing out into two separate characters, but like this man who in many ways was a responsible parent that did care about the safety of his child and whatever this version of him is now.
Yeah.
All right, chapter 55, That Which Was Forgotten. We start with Wendy, who wakes up confused and in pain. She remembers her situation quickly and then rushes out to find her son. Instead, she finds Dick Halloran, who turns out is not dead. Hooray.
Yay.
Back with Danny, Jack finally comes around the corner. And again, Matt, we're hit with the beat that this person looks like Jack, but is not Jack. Danny says as much here. And then we get this part here. I'll scare you, it howled. The mallet whistled fiercely down, smashing into the rug between Danny's feet. Danny didn't flinch. You lied about me. You connived with her. You plotted against me, and you cheated. You copied that final exam. The eyes glared out at him from beneath the furrowed brows. There was an expression of lunatic cunning in them. I'll find it, too. It's down in the basement somewhere. I'll find it. They promised me I could look all I want. It raised the mallet again. Yes, they promised, Danny said. But they lie. The mallet hesitated at the top of its swing. So that's kind of the answer to one of the open questions we had of what the fuck he's looking for down in those fucking milk receipts, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's total madness, but it's an answer.
But again, this is a Jack concern. This is Jack copying his play and confusing his play with reality again.
Yes.
And this is like, even the idea of they promised me, they being the hotel, promised me being Jack Torrance, I could look all I want. So this is Jack still.
Yeah.
Matt?
It's Jack. It's all about Jack's ego and his pride. Once again, I mean, it's delusional and it's bizarre and it makes no sense. Mm-hmm. But you're right that it is using that same structure of narrative that Jack has been living inside. I mean, that's, we've used the word narrativizing like 300 times while talking about The Shining.
Yes.
And interestingly, not that often prior to The Shining, because it's just obviously such a theme here specifically. Sure. And it's like the idea, I think, is like Jack has at this point gotten so lost in the labyrinth of his own narrativizing that he has lost his grip on actual reality. And now you can say something to him, the stolen exam is in the basement. And he's so like deranged in sort of the literal sense of that word that he's like, yeah, that makes sense. Like that makes sense within the narrative structure that I have built for myself in my head.
Yeah. No, I like it.
But once again, this is the kind of thing that makes me enjoy the all work and no play, makes Jack a dull boy as like a simple film friendly version of this idea. I just very clever.
No, I think you're so right. Like, we're gonna watch that movie again and talk about it here in a couple weeks, but Kubrick distilled one of the most important Jackian things down to a beautiful scene.
Yeah.
So this all actually seems to get to Jack, Matt, and he hesitates here, and we see here the face in front of him changed. It was hard to say how. There was no melting or merging of features. The body trembled slightly, and then the bloody hands opened up like broken claws. The mallet fell from them and thumped on the rug. That was all. But suddenly his daddy was there, looking at him in mortal agony, and a sorrow so great that Danny's heart flamed within his chest. The mouth drew down in a quivering bow. "Doc," Jack Torrance said, "run away, quick, and remember how much I love you." "No," Danny said. "Oh, Danny, for God's sake." "No," Danny said. He took one of his father's bloody hands and kissed it. "It's almost over." So, I mean, this is one of those moments that kind of sort of a little bit contradicts what we were saying here. It seems that, like, if this is a possession story, that Danny's words and in the way that we pointed out throughout the rest of the novel, that Danny is always the thing that when Jack is able to push back against the hotel briefly, it is always centered around Danny. When he almost has this moment of clarity, it's almost always centered around Danny. He has a moment here, right, where he seems to seize control again briefly.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't necessarily see it as a contradiction. It's the good side of Jack, or the root of the good part of Jack is his love for his son. You could say love in general, but it's almost always his love for his son specifically.
Yeah, he doesn't ever have a moment of like, "Oh, Wendy."
Yeah, no, they're past that.
I do think that is specifically because I think Jack, without any influence of the hotel, actually just hates Wendy. Like I think he legitimately just hates her, and I think he loves her too. And that's the weird, fucked up, confusing thing about love. Yeah. But I think he has a lot of genuine hatred towards Wendy and women in general. And I think that's a lot of that comes from his father. But
for sure, yes, he's been nursing a lot of resentment toward her for a long time that he just definitely hasn't been toward Danny.
Yeah.
And so the idea that when Danny sort of confronts him with that love, that's enough to flip him again, right? Because it's always this judo match between love and pride in his soul. You can see it happen like paragraph to paragraph in his internal monologue, and Danny standing face to face with him, just no matter how deep the hotel has its hooks in, it flips him back to love, even just briefly. That's long enough, right?
Yeah, and I think in my, I guess I should say, our reading of this book, I don't think we're saying that there is no possessing happening here, right? Like, obviously there is in some level. The hotel is a force that is enacting itself upon Jack Torrance, certainly. I think the thing we're pushing back against generally is the clear cut, this is no longer Jack Torrance, this is not Daddy, he's gone, we don't have to have any kind of weird feeling about Daddy because this wasn't him that did any of this stuff. I think that's the part where we're saying, it's not as simple as that.
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
So Jack grabs the hammer again, but this time turns it on himself, bashing away at his face, and the last remnants of Jack Torrance. Masks off, it turns on Danny for their final game, which is exactly when King reminds us of the bomb he put under the table. I mean, the hotel, the boiler. Jack forgot to dump the boiler, and it's about to explode. So what was your thought on this face smashing?
Hey, this is horrifying and upsetting. I mean, I'm pretty immune to gore at this point, but the idea of a man bashing in his own face, Guillermo del Toro style, in front of his tiny 5-year-old son, is just very upsetting to me.
Mm-hmm. So was this Jack fighting back against the hotel's influence, or was this the hotel saying, all right, fuck this, we don't even need him to look like Jack anymore? So I'm just going to destroy my face. Totally.
I think the latter. I mean, I think that the idea of it being masks off is too perfect, where the hotel is like, all right, fine, we do away with this mask now, this Jack Torrance mask.
Yeah.
And I mean, the book doesn't really describe it, but like what's left has got to just be like a horrifying blood and gore and bone. Yeah.
And I do think this is the one time that I will relent with the idea that this thing standing in front of Danny at this point has very little Jack Torrance left in him.
Yeah, I agree. I can't escape agreeing with that. And we don't really see a single inkling of Jack Torrance past this point. It really just seems to be the hotel almost embodied.
Yeah. So the Jack thing rushes off to prevent the explosion as Danny runs to get his mom. And that moves us on to chapter 56. In case you were wondering if the thing was going to actually explode, the chapter is titled The Explosion.
That's convenient.
So Danny meets up with Dick and Wendy, who is much worse for wear, which is a thing I guess I wanted to talk about here. Like, basically throughout the rest of the novel, except for maybe the epilogue, you're like, oh crap, Wendy might die. Like, legitimately just die. Because she's in really, really bad shape here.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think she would, but yeah, I mean, I think you're definitely meant to think that her and Dick, or one of them, could die of their wounds. Yeah, I agree. Like, the severity of her injuries is quite striking at this point.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So they manage to get some clothes at the last minute and rush out of the hotel. Meanwhile, the Overlook rushes to stop the boiler. I love that King actually allows for the boiler to be dumped, like this idea that like the hotel gets one brief moment of, haha, I won, I did it. And then it doesn't matter. It was too late. And it blows up.
Yep.
And I'm going to read this description because I really just love King's writing here. The Overlook's windows shattered. In the ballroom, the dome over the mantelpiece clock cracked, split in two pieces, and fell to the floor. The clock stopped ticking. Cogs and gears and balance wheel all became motionless. There was a whispered sighing noise and a great billow of dust. In 217, the bathtub suddenly split in two, letting out a small flood of greenish, noxious-smelling water. In the presidential suite, the wallpaper suddenly burst into flames. The batwing doors of the Colorado Lounge suddenly snapped their hinges and fell to the dining room floor. Beyond the basement arc, the great piles and stacks of old paper caught fire and went up with a blowtorch hiss. Boiling water rolled over the flames, but did not quench them. Like burning autumn leaves below a wasp nest, they whirled and blackened. It's beautiful writing, and man, Matt, one thing I definitely did not remember going into this reading this time was just how prevalent, pervasive, and constant the wasp metaphor was in this novel. It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's delightful. The idea, obviously, the metaphor of it. Yeah, I keep thinking about the connection with pricks, but yeah, it's very, very satisfying descriptive writing here. Also, so now that we have this moment past, I have to share with you a blasphemous opinion.
Oh no.
Which is that I think that like I emotionally prefer the ending of the Shining miniseries. Thank you.
Was that good? Did I do good there?
That was, yeah, no, that was perfect.
Okay.
So, what happens there is that Jack is able to regain just enough control to sort of refuse to dump the boiler and thereby, choose to destroy the hotel at the cost of his own life.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in a sense I'm wrong for wanting this, because it does provide a little bit too clean of a cathartic redemption for our prick of a protagonist. But to be honest, I thought that's what was going to happen in the book, because it happened in the miniseries, and I knew the miniseries is more in line with the book. And then when it not only did it not happen, but it was like, oh, the hotel just succeeded in turning the boiler, and then it still blows up. So I was like, that was a moment that I was expecting that didn't happen. So maybe that's why I feel the way I do. I don't know. What do you feel about my strange thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the Shining miniseries is bad. And
yes.
I will say, I think while I generally agree that moment from the Jack perspective works better, the part of it that I find extremely silly is when we see the ghost like try to grab the boiler dump wheel itself and then pass through it, and it's like, oh no, I can't do this. Oh, that's awful.
It is silly, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're doing a lot of comparisons to the movies, and that's fine. But I think the Kubrick version is very, very dark. The miniseries version is much more optimistic and hopeful, and I think this version lies somewhere in between. Where we see Jack ultimately fully succumb to the hotel, to his addiction. He is destroyed prior to defeating the hotel. So he doesn't get a moment of, basically I think what King did in the miniseries is he took the moment where Jack stands before the boiler early in the book and contemplates not letting it go. And he just put that in the end. He just kind of took that scene to the end and then let it play out as if he succeeded in resisting the hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, I mean, you're absolutely right that he doesn't necessarily get a moment of triumph over the hotel here. Like he does in the sense that he's able to say goodbye to his son and say I love you one last time, right? Like that he gets that moment, which is a very heartwarming moment, that he's about to bring the hammer down and kill him, and his son is able to get to him in just enough time to get just the last little bit of Jack Torrance that his son loves in there to say goodbye. So there's that, but it is certainly not he doesn't get to have a victory over in the end I defeated you, hotel. In the end, just like all Stephen King, evil defeated itself, because evil was so concerned with Danny and stopping these people that it forgot to do the simple caretaking things that it was responsible for.
Yeah, it didn't take care of itself. How ironic for a book about alcoholism.
It goes back to our metaphor of the hotel as a living being representing a person, and it failed to take care of itself, and thus destroyed itself.
And I mean, I think the ending of the miniseries, if that had been here, it would have felt just a touch too sentimental for the kind of story that we're really telling here, because this is really just a tragedy about a really screwed up guy.
Yeah, I mean, it is the story of a man succumbing to his alcoholism ultimately, right? And dying because of it.
Yeah,
And so I get the sentimentality, and that's why I say King is a softie a lot of times. He wants these sentimental, powerful endings sometimes. And I mean, the miniseries was written by Stephen King, right? So he came back to this story and this ending and said, I want to schmaltz it up a little bit. And it probably is in response to the extremely dark, depressing anti-Jack ending of the movie, that he decided that he wanted to distinguish his story from that so much that he's going to make it even warmer, even more optimistic, even more hopeful. But that is, No, I get why you prefer that moment, because it gives you something, right? It allows you to say, well, at least at the very end, he was still Jack. And at the very end, he did resist.
Yeah. When I say prefer, it's part of me prefers it, but part of me actually thinks this is more sort of literarily honest, you could say.
Yeah.
I mean, just in case you thought I wasn't going to make the connection, Frodo does not toss the ring into the fire.
Yeah.
Frodo succumbs at the last minute, and it's only through the Sauron, the ring, the hotel, whatever evil force, its own self-destructive greed and negligence leading to Gollum trying to take the ring, and then of course the ring falls, and that's exactly what happens here. I flubbed that a little bit. The point is that the hotel destroys itself in the same way that the ring destroys itself. It's not actually Frodo nor Jack that actually does the right thing at the last second.
No, that's a great comparison. I love it. You're absolutely right. King is obsessed with Tolkien, actually, more so than you, I think, Matt. Actually,
maybe I'm actually willing to grant that.
All right, so we move on to chapter 57, our penultimate chapter, titled "Exit." The explosion threw the survivors out of the porch as they scramble to get dressed in warm clothes. King, this is really where once again we look at Wendy. I think we see she's not wearing shoes. She doesn't have a jacket on yet, and we have to say, she's not doing very well. I'm worried about this girl. But as you said, I guess you were never actually worried about her. Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah, I mean, here's the problem. Like, I'm just being honest. This chapter overall, like, I like once the boiler blew, I was just like, yeah, the book's over now. Because I just knew, how it all plays out from here.
Fair.
So it was kind of the least tense part overall. And it's interesting because King definitely continues to try to put some tension in there, as we will see.
Mm-hmm. So as Dick is driving towards the equipment shed because he wants to go there to get some blankets, they drive by the presidential suite, and he sees this. From the window of the presidential suite, he thought he saw a huge dark shape issue, blotting out the snowfield behind it. For a moment, it assumed the shape of a huge, obscene manta, and then the wind seemed to catch it, to tear it and shred it like old dark paper. It fragmented, was caught in a whirling eddy of smoke, and a few moments later was gone as if it had never been. But in those few seconds, as it whirled blackly, dancing like negative motes of light, he remembered something from his childhood, 50 years ago or more. He and his brother had come upon a huge nest of ground wasps just north of their farm. It had been tucked into a hollow between the earth and an old lightning-blasted tree. His brother had a big old, word I'm not going to say, in the band of his hat. Saved all the way from the 4th of July. He had lighted it and tossed it in the nest. It had exploded with a loud bang, and an angry rising hum, almost a low shriek, had risen from the blasted nest. They had run away as if demons had been at their heels. In a way, Halloran supposed, the demons had been. And looking back over his shoulder as he was now, he had on that day seen a large dark cloud of hornets rising in the hot air, swirling together, breaking apart, looking for whatever enemy had done this to their home, so that they, the single group intelligence, could sting it to death. So Matt, what's your reaction to this? Obviously this is like the energy, the soul, the power of the hotel kind of rising up and then breaking up.
Well, I love, King sometimes he drops clues for idiots like me to try to put things together. And here he basically says the key to me here is single group intelligence.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's like we've asked a few times, what is the hotel, right? What is the manager? And here I think this is the key to unlock it. Is like just like a swarm of wasps is not an entity. It is made up of individuals.
Yeah.
But in a sense, it acts as an entity. It acts as a hive mind, as a group intelligence with a single will.
Sure.
That is what the hotel is. It is made of these many, many terrible things that happened. None of them is individually in charge. There is nothing separate from them. There is just the swarm, the accumulation of all of these evils into one giant manta of evil. Of course, the manta reminds me of I believe that the demons in the Dark Tower series are described as being manta-like as well.
No, I think you're right. Yeah. This is definitely a through line in his dark demon universe.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dick takes them to the equipment shed, Matt, and oh boy, there's some things we have to talk about here. First, this is just a fun world building thing. Speaking of words that we don't like, but as Dick walks in, the first thing he sees is that one of the roque mallets is missing. Now, Matt, If the Overlook is capable of spontaneously generating real tangible objects like cat masks or bottles of gin, for example, why did it seemingly ghost walk into the equipment shed, remove a roque mallet, and bring it to Jack in order for him to kill his family instead of just, I don't know, materializing one?
Well, conservation of energy, of course,
okay.
is the answer to your question.
I mean, it is a really interesting thing to point out, though, that the roque mallet that he was using is a roque mallet from the equipment shed. It is the one that he saw when he was in the equipment shed. It didn't create this. It didn't materialize this. This is the roque mallet. It's interesting, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we continually ask. I mean, it's interesting. It's a question that keeps coming up, and people seem to be interested in it based on discussions that I see happening. Was it really gin that he drank, or was it pretend gin, right? Mm-hmm. And if the hotel needed to transport a physical roque mallet from room to room, did it have some gin somewhere on site that it transported to Jack, or was it pretend gin,
mm-hmm.
or did it manifest the gin out of thin air? We don't really know. I don't know that it matters a ton, but it is interesting that King, is careful to note that, the physical presence of these mallets are accounted for.
Yeah. But then, Matt, here comes the one part that, oh boy. As Dick looks at the roque mallet set, the Overlook, in what must be a last desperate attempt, goes to work on him, and we see the change happen almost immediately. He suddenly says, this is all Danny's fault, and it's Danny's fault that his father died, and there's a word for that. It's called patricide. How could you do that? And he's got to kill Danny. And it says, Halloran drew the mallet from the rack and turned towards the flood of white light from the snowmobile headlamp. His feet scratched unevenly over the boards of the equipment shed, like the feet of a clockwork toy that has been wound up and set in motion. So this is the one part, and I think we're going to have to spend some time here, Matt, to really get our heads around this. We've talked about choice over and over again, and how this was Jack's choice. Jack let it in. Jack, it's because of the way he is. And this, to me, seems to, at least on some level, contradict a little bit of that. Because if the hotel was able to do this to Dick in moments, minutes, then its ability to do this to Jack over months isn't surprising anymore. Like, it seems almost inevitable that Jack would falter, and therefore kind of starts to push the blame away from him. Like, if Dick can be almost possessed in seconds, then how can we blame Jack for eventually succumbing to this thing over the course of hours and days and weeks and months?
Yeah, I don't just want to wave away your issue here, because I mean, it's a valid concern. I don't really have a good answer for it, I guess. Like, okay, I mean, I have two bad answers that I'll give you. And we can see if there's anywhere to go with them. Number one, it doesn't work. So Dick is able to just kind of shrug it off ultimately. Like, it takes hold for a second, but then Dick is able to just say, nope. It all told, it adds up to like a brief intrusive thought, and then he masters himself, and then it's not a problem anymore. Whereas, in contrast to Jack, Jack is he never really put up a fight, is the thing. Like, it slowly and inexorably did its work on him, but it's not like he ever stood up to it, really. Except,
sure.
I mean, you could nitpick that, by the way. You could say, well, there was that moment when he was outside of the hotel and he realized that it was malevolent, and then it's not clean. That's why I don't particularly like that as an argument. It's not a clean argument. Mm-hmm. Another probably even worse rebuttal is that, honestly, and I think there's a chance here, is that King, just as he's writing the falling action of his climax, he just wants to wring every last bit of tension that he can, every last bit of terror, and the idea that suddenly Dick, the savior, is briefly corrupted, and that you're worried that things could all go south. That was too sweet to pass on. even though it kind of cuts against like the thematic point. So I don't know. I don't particularly like it either. Like, I guess that's the problem, is I kind of agree with you that I don't like it.
I love this book. I love this book so much, and it's been a joy rereading it with you. This is the one part that I really just pushed against, and I think it's almost because it seemingly contradicts what I think this book is about, and it gets me to wonder, how much of this story, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because I don't want to psychoanalyze a person I've never met, but how much of this story is Stephen King, the addict, pushing against the fear that he could ultimately destroy his family and his life, by giving himself an out. We have to say Stephen King wrote this story while he was an alcoholic, while he was not sober. I don't think he had fully come to the realization that he had a serious drinking problem at that point in his life. I think he definitely had it at that point in his life, but I don't think he had come to accept that about himself yet. So you wonder, would the Stephen King of 2023 agree with the Stephen King of 1977, I think it was, and his outlook and opinion on the nature of his addiction and alcoholism, and how it takes one over, and responsibility. There are moments in this ending, especially this part to me, that feels like I need to make sure people understand that at the end of the day, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
And that's not a fair thing to put on him. But there are moments reading this time that really made me feel that, combining with the idea that he hates the Kubrick version, because the Kubrick version has no bit or moment of redemption for Jack. It sees Jack as the bad guy the whole time and evil. And I actually think this book aligns with that in many ways. But there's moments like this where it's like, no, but I need to know. I, Stephen King, need to know that that this is an external force that's going to come in and do this to me, and it could happen to anyone. And I need it to not be me. It can't be me. Like we talked in the first episode, I think, about how a lot of this book is like the nightmares of Stephen King. Like as a father and a husband and an author and just a person, a human being, the scariest things I could come up with is that I am responsible for destroying my family.
Yeah.
And my addiction is responsible for destroying my family. And so I need to know that at the end of the day, I'm going to be okay, or at least that this is something external to me that I that might not necessarily be within my control. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's so. Okay, The Shining came out in 1977. In 1987, 10 years later, that was when King's wife, Tabitha, staged like the intervention that you read about in the in the interviews and the autobiographies and everything.
Yeah, and I guess we should say before you go on, sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but like part of the reason why I do feel so comfortable talking about this is because he's so extensively talked about it, so like he's brought his struggles with addiction into the conversation. And so if he had made it clear he wasn't comfortable talking about these things, we'd probably talk about it less, but it's very difficult for me to not in these moments. So anyway, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, the point of bringing up the idea is that this is a man who remained an addict in a serious way, maybe even got worse in the 10 years after writing this novel. 10 years. So like, this is a man who's he's struggling with this stuff. I don't think he likes being this way.
Yeah.
But he can't help it. And he's working through this. And I like, if it were just all pat and resolved in his head, then clear cut, then maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation, because the character of Jack Torrance would be much less ambiguous. But I think a lot of that ambiguity stems from the author not having quite come to the end of his struggle here.
I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that the king that wrote this book looks at alcoholism differently than the king that exists today, right? The man who has gone through the process of recovery, who has been sober for decades and understands this disease, probably more than a lot of people do. There's no doubt in my mind that those two versions of this man have difference in opinions about this stuff. And I wonder, I wonder if this is one of those moments that this is an expression of that difference,
Uh-huh.
And I think like we're not going to read Dr. Sleep as part of this series, at least, but I want to go back and revisit that book now, having read this book, and see if a lot of maybe his writing of that novel was not just let's look at what Dan Torrance is up to 30 years later, but let's revisit the idea of alcoholism with what I have learned about it, and try to set the record straight, as it were.
Yeah. I mean, I've thought before, and I don't think I've ever said it on the show, but I've thought, I know King has written that Tabitha, his wife, is always his like alpha reader who reads his drafts, and he respects her opinions. But also, you got to imagine there's a kind of communication, there's a kind of privileged communication that's happening there, and he's imagining her as his reader when he writes these things. And I've always wondered, is The Shining a kind of cry for help, or a kind of attempt to communicate something that he can't say out loud?
That's really interesting.
To his wife.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you got to just imagine being Tabitha and reading this book, and you got to know, I mean, there's got to be some Wendy in Tabitha, or some Tabitha and Wendy, I guess I should say, being like, man, I know my husband has problems, but he's a good man. He's trying. I can overlook those problems. And then literally 10 years after The Shining comes out, she's like, I'm going to leave you if you don't get your shit together. Because
I mean, do you wonder, like, you got to imagine her alpha reading this book while he's like sitting on the other side of the room drinking a beer and like giving him the side eye.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
You fucking kidding me with this shit, man?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that's delving into people's personal life in a way I don't want to, but yeah, I mean, you can kind of build the scene in your head. Certainly.
It frankly, it built itself in my head.
Sure.
After reading this and after reading On Writing, and just, I involuntarily started thinking, like, what must that have been like?
Oh man, it's so wild. It's so wild to hear him say the phrase, which I think he does say in On Writing, that he didn't realize he was writing about himself when he wrote this book. And it's like, you read this book and you're like, how can you not?
I know. Isn't it, you know what that is? That's narrativizing right there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. But I mean, there is a distinct possibility that you're absolutely right, that part of going through the process of writing this novel is, step 1 of 500 to getting to the point where you are dealing with your problems in a way that Jack Torrance never could or did.
Yeah, I guess so.
All right, so the three drive away as the hotel, even the equipment shed. I like that we get the specific mention that the equipment shed eventually catches fire too, because obviously the evil of the hotel still hangs out there too somehow. Yeah, I thought it turned into a manta and burned away, but I guess there was a little hornet in the equipment shed of evil still.
This is a separate house demon that just lives in the equipment shed.
Yeah. And I really love this moment when they're greeted 15 minutes later by snowmobile engines, brandy, clothes, and a doctor, because our good friends not only sent them on their way, or sent Dick on his way, but also summoned a posse and went to help out, because that's the White occasionally.
Yeah. I guess presumably they heard the giant explosion, but
I guess that's probably fair.
It's a much needed bit of comfort here after a very harrowing set of chapters.
Yep. And they brought booze too. Yay.
That's a good point.
All right, so we move from here to chapter 58, titled Epilogue/Summer. We catch up with our characters months later in a Maine vacation resort that Dick is now working at. Dick is a cook there, and he is walking up to Wendy, who's sitting on the porch of her cabin reading, and he looks at her, and we get this line. The back was the slowest healing, and she was still in the brace, hence the formal posture. But the change was more than that. She looked older, and some of the laughter had gone out of her face. Now, as she sat reading her book, Halloran saw a grave sort of beauty there that had been missing on the day he had first met her some 9 months ago. Then she had still been mostly girl. Now she was a woman, a human being who had been dragged around to the dark side of the moon and had come back able to put the pieces back together. But those pieces, Halloran thought, they never fit just the same way again. Never in this world. So it's this thing where, like, obviously she went through this transformative process and managed to survive it, which makes her stronger as a person. But I really love the idea of, but she's not whole and never really will be whole again.
Yeah. I mean, I love that writing. I think Wendy actually has gotten the most development out of any of the characters in the story.
Yeah, I agree. I love her. I think she's great. And man, what a tragedy. It's sad. Yeah. It's really sad.
Yeah.
I think bittersweet is the word, I think.
I agree.
So we learn that Danny has been having nightmares often, but they are slowly getting better. Jack's best friend Al has gotten Wendy a job down in Maryland, and they seem, ready to move on with their lives, but they're still struggling.
Yeah, right. I mean, you're definitely left with the sense that everything is not okay, and maybe everything, won't be okay. It'll never be the way it was. You can never fix it,
right?
But they're going to move on anyway.
There's really no getting over this. You just have to move on from it.
This ending makes me see why people kept asking King, like, what happens to Danny?
Yeah.
And King's reaction of, you don't want to know.
Right. It's such a Stephen King thing to be like, well, he becomes an alcoholic.
Yeah.
It's like, fuck.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So Dick goes and visits Danny, who is out by the lake fishing and thinking of his father. I really love this Matt, the idea that he's fishing, right? Like, this is like in the big book of father-son activities. I think fishing is like number one of the most traditional, archetypical father-son activities is going fishing.
Yep.
And Danny is now forced to do this alone. And it's, again, bittersweet, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
But, the book ends with his family coming around him. So his mother is still there and Dick is still there. And so he finishes the book not fishing alone. They all sit on the dock together and fish. Yeah,
it's a beautiful moment, but it's within context of a tragic moment.
Yeah. So Dick has some advice for Danny, and he says this, and I need to read this because this is kind of the conceit of the book, I think. Danny, you listen to me. I'm going to talk to you about it once and never again the same way. There's some things no 6-year-old boy in the world should have to be told, but the way things should be and the way things are hardly ever go together. The world's a hard place, Danny. It don't care. It don't hate you and me, but it don't love us either. Terrible things happen in the world, and they're things no one can explain. Good people die in bad, painful ways and leave the folks that love them all alone. Sometimes it seems like it's only the bad people who stay healthy and prosper. The world don't love you, but your mama does, and so do I. You're a good boy. You grieve for your daddy, and when you feel you have to cry over what happened to him, you go into a closet or under your covers and cry until it's all out of you again. That's what a good son has to do. But see that you get on. That's your job in this hard world, to keep your love alive and see that you get on no matter what. Pull your act together and just go on. I love it.
Yeah, it's great. It's this affected me maybe more than I expected because it's like a perfect match with the way Dr. Sleep ends. Mm-hmm. Which I have to assume that's completely intentional, but I didn't see it coming.
Sure.
The idea of going on.
Yeah, and I mean, this idea, like, you could imagine, what if someone had given this same speech to a young Jack, right? Like, Jack, the same thing happened. The world's a hard place. Jack had to experience horrible, horrible things as a kid. Good people were made to suffer. Bad people seemed to go on, and none of it made any sense. And Jack, took this as a chip on his shoulder, that the world hated him, right? That Jack, I think he said that the world is out to get him. And what Dick says here is that no, the world's not out to get you. It's just cruel. Like, it's just the way it is. It doesn't care about you. That's the thing. It's not hunting you, but it's not going to help you either. And that's just the way it is. And what you have to do is go on. You have to move on. You have to live. and that's something that Jack was never truly able to do. So there's hope here for Danny. I think that's the thing we're left with here, is that, you look at this, we talk so much about the cycle of trauma and how, like, possibly Jack's father behaved this way because his father behaved this way, and Jack behaved this way because his father behaved this way. And there's this real fear that I think has been present textually and subtextually in the book that Danny is so much like his father, and going through something like this again, having an abusive father, having a father that hurt them and tried to murder them, is going to continue the cycle. And I think King gives us a little shred of hope here at the end that no, we can beat this cycle with this person in his life, perhaps with greater understanding of the shine and what it is and what it does, and the curse that it is, and also the gift that it is. It's possible for him to overcome this.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. It makes me think about how much of the time Jack is feeling sorry for himself and feeling aggrieved, mm-hmm. and dwelling on how the world has wronged him. And I think it's fair to say that he had a very weak father figure. Yeah. A father figure who also dwelt on all the ways that he had been wronged by the world. Yeah. And how different it might have been if he had a father figure like Dick to say, like, it's not about you. Bad things happen. In a sense, it's kind of a tough thing to say, to be like, you got to buck up and soldier on, buddy. Like, there's nothing I can say to make this okay. And there's no story you can tell where this was good or anything but terrible, but you just got to do it. And in fact, not only do you have to soldier on, that if you need to cry about this, you go cry in your room and don't cry where your mom can see you, because that's just what a man has to do. Like really, it's a remarkably kind of almost hard stance on
it is. Yeah. The thing that I like about it is that I don't think Dick here is saying that, like, this is going to magically solve your problem. Like, I'm going to give you this speech and then you'll be okay. And you'll be, well, Dick told me I gotta be strong and hard. So that's what I'm going to be. And I'm never going to struggle with this again. And it's going to be totally fine. No, of course not. But it is a representative of a sort of guidance that I think will, in the long run, help Danny move past his trauma in a way that Jack never could.
Yeah. Or even just to say, this is what you have to do as a man. Like, this is your responsibility. Mm-hmm. This isn't even about you, Danny. This is about being a man. This is about being strong. This is about
being, it's the world. It's just like what,
just
what the world, not even what the world expects of you, but just what you're going to have to do to make it in the world. Yeah. Going back to the statement is like, this inhuman place makes human monsters. Like, mm-hmm. this is the world, man. And this is what you got to do.
Yeah. I love it.
But unfortunately, we know, because we watched Dr. Sleep, that it didn't quite work out that way. We're going to have to do some sort of thing on Dr. Sleep one day, because I didn't have the desire to, when setting up the schedule and everything, but rereading this book has really, really enkindled that desire in me.
Well, I just love the movie so much that it would be hard. It would almost feel weird not to. We did talk about it. So
the book is very different from the movie, but I get you. I mean, it has to be very different from the movie, because the book is a sequel to this book in which the hotel blowed up.
Yes, indeed. Just to remind everyone, we covered the movie over on our Patreon bonus podcast. We did do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is The Shining. I don't know if we got to the bottom of our answers about Jack and the hotel and which is which, but I think we did about as good a work as we can. So maybe we'll revisit that one more time on our overview episode next week. But I'm still conflicted, Matt. I'm still conflicted.
I'll just go to my old standby when I don't know what to make of something, is say that the author intends for us to grapple with this ambiguity.
That is the perfect out, and I will happily jump on that with you.
It's my favorite parachute out of any difficult literary conundrum.
All right, Matt, let's move on to the discussion questions section. We asked a pretty fun question, and I think got a lot of fun answers. So what was the question last week, Matt?
The question was, what is your favorite instance of the whole plot hinging on a small moment of kindness?
We were being a little facetious there, but people.
I think people understood the spirit in which the question was intended, which
I agree.
we knew y'all would, because y'all are extremely smart.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so from Felidao, I know y'all love your anime answers, so here's one. In Naruto, that's the one about ninjas, not pirates. A young ninja named Uchiha Itachi is given a secret mission by his government to murder his own family, the Uchiha clan. Itachi executes his orders perfectly and kills every member of his clan, with one exception, his little brother, Sasuke. Instead of killing Sasuke, Itachi uses a powerful illusionary technique on him. Itachi can make victims experience 72 hours of subjective time in an illusory world, while only 1 second passes in the real world. Itachi thus forces Sasuke to watch the massacre of the Uchiha clan for 72 hours straight, over and over again, including the scene in which Itachi kills their mother and father. Sasuke is 7 years old. Understandably, this experience traumatizes Sasuke beyond belief and instills in him a single-minded thirst for vengeance and an obsession with obtaining enough power to kill Itachi, no matter the cost. Oh, right. The discussion question was about kindness.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jesus Christ.
Well, Itachi not only spared Sasuke's life, but also left him with a burning motivation to become stronger, which always improves your odds of survival in the ninja world. Itachi also planned to let Sasuke kill him eventually and return home as the hero who brought the crazy Kinslayer to justice. So really, Itachi was being nice, super nice. And this did massively affect the entire plot in essentially every conceivable way, because Sasuke is basically the co-main character alongside Naruto.
What the fuck?
So, Felidao, I have to confess that I've watched every bit of Naruto.
I know.
Yeah, and this is one of those times where I do kind of feel like he changed his mind about what the deal with Itachi was going to be, because the amount of cruelty that Itachi shows in like the first part of the show does not really line up with the later Itachi. But that's okay. You know what? I could be wrong. Maybe it was all part of the plan.
That was ridiculous. That was a ridiculous answer, Phil, and you know it too. You just wrote a ridiculous answer.
It was actually super nice how Itachi tortured him. It was all part of the plan.
Okay. Next we have Aqua Lungfish, who says, not so much my favorite example, but just the only one I can remember right now. Les Mis. Now, prefacing this with the fact that I never read the book, just seen a couple adaptations, but the whole story only happens because the bishop shows kindness to Jean Valjean when the police bring him back. Even though Valjean stole from the bishop, he let him go with everything he stole, saying it was a gift, and even giving a little extra. This not only lets Valjean continue as a free man, it fundamentally changes the course of his life. The reason I like this one is that you can pretty much trace every event in the story step by step back to that act. I enjoy tracing because of an effect like that. I often do it with events in my own life, so it's satisfying to see it carried out in an epic story like this. On top of that, it's solid enough plot that it beats that it's been used and adapted all over the place. For example, an episode of the show Prison Break pretty much copies it straight, but it still works because of the simplicity. You know, I tried really hard to read Les Mis one time a few years ago, and it's a very, very big, very ponderous book. I only got about halfway through. And it's, of course, very different from the musical that Aqua is probably referencing here, because I feel like most people's interaction with Les Mis at this point is the musical. But yeah, I mean, I agree. That is, I love that moment because it so confuses Jean Valjean, because he just doesn't understand why someone would be nice to him in this way. Like the thing, Matt, I don't know if you've ever read this book, but
no.
Like the opening page is so funny, because the opening page of this book basically says, all right, I got to tell you about this guy. He's like the nicest person ever. And none of this actually matters to the plot of the story I'm about to tell you, but actually it super does. And then it goes on for like 50 pages, just like carving out and explaining this bishop character and why he is the way he is and what leads him to being the type of person that would see a person like Jean Valjean and do him this random kindness for no reason. And it's actually really cool, because it's like this is so wild and unexpected that I needed to go on for half 100 pages explaining why a person would behave like this.
That's interesting. I didn't know that at all. Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I need to read that though. That's I don't even think I've seen an adaptation of Les Mis. Like
you didn't watch the Tom Hooper wonderful musical?
No, you made fun of it too much.
It was so bad. Apologies if y'all like I really do not like Tom Hooper and how he directs anything. So he took a musical that I actually very, very enjoy, and he made terrible choices all throughout.
Yeah. Well, I haven't seen it, but I distinctly and clearly remember your criticisms from several years ago.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah. All right. Next, we have BC Johnson. Obligatory Buffy answer. In the first episode, Welcome to the Hellmouth, Buffy becomes fast friends with popular girl Cordelia, who immediately lets her into the cool crowd because Buffy's an LA transplant. And she knows that vamp nail polish is so over. I don't get it, but okay, cool.
I wonder what you must think of Buffy based on some of these answers. Anyway, continue.
I am sure I have an elaborate mental model of Buffy that is entirely wrong. They go on to say, but when Cordelia is casually cruel to local wallflower Willow, who Buffy doesn't even know, Buffy goes and sits with Willow at lunch and reaches out to make a genuine connection with this bullied girl. This one kind action is basically responsible for the entire show. This draws Willow and Xander into her life, ultimately saving Willow's life and her own. Had she not sat with Willow instead of Cordelia, multiple apocalypses would have happened. And we'd have no musical episode, which is the real tragedy.
True. It is this really simple moment of, character building. Like it's just one of those things where you're like, oh, these writers know what they're doing, because it's just this really simple thing where she shows up at the school and she's clearly one of the popular people and just seems to fit in with the popular girl so much better. And then there's just this moment of she just immediately recognizes who's being cruel and who's being kind, and just immediately attaches herself to the kindness part. And you're just like, oh, I have a fundamental understanding of who this person is now. It's just really solid writing.
That's great. I love it.
Yep.
This Buffy show you speak of.
It's pretty good.
Sounds interesting.
Although I'm in the middle of a rewatch right now, and it's still great and wonderful, but it's also showing its age to me in a way that it never has before.
Yeah, I hate how that happens.
Yeah. Growing up sucks.
Yeah.
Time is bad.
I agree.
Next, we have Eidolon Jones, who says, this doesn't fit perfectly since the entire plot doesn't hinge on it, but it affects the fate of a major character in a massive way. I'm talking about Miles Morales, Marvel's 2015 Secret Wars comic, and a 3-week-old cheeseburger. Spoilers for an 8-year-old comic, I suppose. So if you care about that, just fast forward a few minutes. It's also mostly from memory, so I may get a few details wrong. So maybe it won't be spoilers at all. I don't know. We'll see. The multiverse has died, and Doctor Doom has gathered the scraps of what's left into Battle World, where different universes exist as areas in a dimension where Doom is supreme overlord. A few survivors from 616, the main Marvel comic universe, made it alongside a life raft of sorts, as well as Miles Morales, the Spider-Man of the Ultimate Universe, 1610. Events unfold, yada, 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 fate of the multiverse, blah, 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 death of all living things, so on and so forth. Our Peter Parker and Miles Morales find Molecule Man, the mega-powered dude who gave Doom the power to build Battleworld. He's very hungry, and Miles just happens to have a cheeseburger tucked into his suit. The burger's been there for 8 years and 3 weeks. Although the 8 years were in suspended animation, to be fair, but Molecule Man is just grateful for the food and tells Miles he owes him one. Later on, when things have settled down and Molecule Man is rebuilding the multiverse, he puts Miles into 616, so he exists alongside the main universe characters, since his Earth was pretty solidly destroyed. In addition, because he was so grateful for the cheeseburger, Molecule Man makes sure to add in the fact that Miles' recently deceased mother never died in this new universe, giving him back his family. Not a bad deal for some McDonald's, I'd say.
That's nice.
That's a great answer. It also shows how fucking ridiculous comics are.
Yeah. Comics are basically just a big old fan fiction universe, and that's fine. That's beautiful in its own way. I love it. I wonder how much of this, if any, is ever going to make its way into like the end of the Spider-Verse franchise.
I feel like it's slowly happening, man.
You're
just layering more shit onto more shit.
I mean, like certain aspects of this, you kind of do see them in like the trailer for the new Miles Morales movie, and like some of the new like multiverse stuff with the MCU. So we'll see. This could all of this, including the cheeseburger, could end up in the MCU.
I mean, as long as they keep it grounded in character, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's just like when you try to explain the plot of the Dark Tower and it sounds insane, but it all makes perfect sense in the moment because you're grounded in who these people are.
Yeah,
so.
well, that's why it's a great character, a great answer. I mean, because this answer focuses on the idea that consequential things hinged on a small act of kindness, which is a great storytelling, character-rooted storytelling concept.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Complicated 9519 says, y'all are going to hate me for this, but Luffy from One Piece.
I knew it.
I feel like you and I just know everything about One Piece now.
Did you know it's about pirates?
I think I heard that. Now, yes, it's a silly anime about pirates, but there's a lot of talk and plot with suppression, racism, corruption in the local world government. But I really have to point out is what I really have to point out here is anytime Luffy and his crew visits an island, if one of the locals feeds this man when he's hungry, that small act of kindness will give him the urge to break that country free from whatever corrupt leader or coup is going on there. It's silly, and I know y'all hate anime, so I won't go into detail, but it's just a funny piece of plot that always comes back. That's fun. There's something very like deeply like mythological, borderline religious about the idea of like you feed a stranger who is hungry, which seems to keep coming up in these answers, and then they will, go to the ends of the earth for you. That's kind of delightful to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. There is something basic and universal and innately human about feeding a stranger.
Yeah,
and it's like the most simple and ultimate act of kindness.
Yeah.
I just want to point out here that we don't hate anime. I hate anime.
Yes, it's true.
Matt watched the entirety of Naruto, apparently.
Yeah.
Which isn't like 1 billion episodes.
So I watched all of Naruto, and then I just read the manga for Naruto Shippuden.
God, that's worse.
Yeah, I know. That's why I said it the way I said it. So there's that.
I hope everyone knows I'm just messing around. Enjoy whatever you like. I like some anime.
Yeah, you've definitely liked at least one or two things that we've watched.
That's true. Next, we have Squatch42, who says, in the classic film Billy Madison, the titular character felt remorse for people he had mistreated years ago in high school. He called and apologized to Danny McGrath for giving him such a hard time in their youth. Danny accepts his apology, and as a result, he crosses Billy's name off his list of people to kill. At the movie's climax, the villainous antagonist, Eric Gordon, having been bested into academic decathlon by our hero and then repelling an assault by the former wrestler known as the Revolting Blob, is about to shoot Billy's love interest Veronica in retribution for his failure. Suddenly, a shot rings out, and Eric is shot squarely in his right buttock, incapacitating him and neutralizing the threat. The shot that saved the day was fired by none other than Danny McGrath. Yes, Billy, we are all glad you called that guy. Truly one of the finest moments of good karma coming back around in all of cinema. Oh, Adam Sandler movies.
Yeah, the golden age of Adam Sandler. It's hard to beat.
I think the younger folks don't realize how like instrumental the 1-2 punch of Billy Madison and Happy Gilmore was to people of our age.
Yeah.
At least boys of our age. I don't know how girls are probably into it too, but all my friends absolutely loved those movies.
Yeah, it was a perfect lightning in a bottle, and it's interesting. You can't just show somebody Happy Gilmore now and have it land the way that it landed back then. It was the thing back then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, Shenanigoat says, thanks to a small act of kindness from Benny the Jet Rodriguez, we got one of the best coming of age stories of all time. The Sandlot follows Scotty Smalls, the awkward new kid in town who is struggling to make friends. He tries playing baseball with some neighborhood kids with disastrous results. Nevertheless, Benny, the star player of the group, invites him back to play in the outfield. The rest of the kids are apoplectic at Scotty's ineptitude on the field, but they go along with it since Benny vouched for him. It takes some time, but ultimately Scotty earns the respect of the other boys and is welcomed as part of the team. As we learn in voiceover from adult Scotty, it turns out to be the greatest summer of his life. I love this story, especially when viewed from the lens of how one act of kindness can have long-lasting effects on multiple lives.
Wonderful answer. Love The Sandlot.
Yeah, there's something very Stand By Me about The Sandlot. Except
I was about to say there's something extremely Stephen King about The Sandlot.
Yeah,
Sandlot.
it's very much like giant evil dog but he's not actually evil. St. Bernard even. Yeah.
But even like, I mean, obviously like literally, but I think even like thematically and stylistically, it feels very much of akin to certain kind of King writing.
Yeah. I mean, the focus on the young people hold on. I'm figuring this out. Sandlot came out in 93. Stand By Me came out in 86. So honestly, I feel like Sandlot is like a riff on Stand By Me, now that I'm thinking about this. But
hey, Matt,
not in a bad way.
Sandlot came out in 93. Talks about the summer of 62. So if they made the Sandlot today, it would take place in 1992.
They should do that.
Fuck.
There should be there should be Tamagotchis in Sandlot.
All right, next we have B Boru 1014, who says, I'm going with one of my favorite authors besides Stephen King, Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. The main character chooses to help a girl who appears before him on the street, bloody and nearly dead, to the chagrin of his fiancée. This one act of kindness leads him to London below, changes his character, his future, his entire understanding of the world. Adventures, Black Friars, angels, marquise, rats, death, and the world's largest bore all await him. At the end, will the safety and security of his London above life win out, or of the life of London below? You know, Neverwhere is one of the few Gaiman books I haven't read, so this is like a great summary of a thing I want to read immediately now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know nothing about Neverwhere, so yeah, very compelling pitch right there. Cool. All right, Steve Living Room says, tough question. I really like the Irene and John Cullum answers. Oh, we missed those.
The algorithm did not select.
Damn it. My answer would have to be Danny's.
Why do you always answer as a... people are never going to believe this is a real thing when you answer. Damn it.
I should just share the code.
You should open source.
Then you would have no idea if I was actually using it, though. Anyway, they go on to say, my answer would have to be Danny's friend Billy in Dr. Sleep. While they ended up being best friends, it was a very simple act from a then stranger that helped Danny start on the road to recovery. Billy saw a drunk running from his past, and without knowing him, helped him. Beautiful. Yeah, that's a perfect example, because even in the story, Danny is like, why did you help me? Like, you had no reason to help me. And Billy's like, I recognized something in myself, and I wanted to help.
Yeah. Last but not least, we have Hobo Demon, who says, Ghost Dog Way of the Samurai is built on several moments in which kindness drove fate. In the opening sequence, Forrest Whitaker's kindness stays his hand from killing a witness to his contracted killing of worthy targets, and her survival sets the plot in motion. And in his past, depending on which version of the Rashomon you believe, Louis's kindness or self-preservation was a prerequisite for the film being called Ghost Dog instead of just Stupid Fucking White Man, which would have been a fantastic title for a film about a falling empire.
Have you seen Ghost Dog, Scott?
I haven't. No.
Yeah, I love Ghost Dog. It's really interesting. It's very unusual. It's like everything. I believe it's Jim Jarmusch, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really, and Forrest Whitaker, really interesting. Everything about it. I'm not going to say anymore.
I love Forrest Whitaker as an actor. He's so unique and fascinating. I love him.
Yeah. Me too.
All right. Well, that is all the answers that the algorithm selected for us this week. So thank you, everyone who submitted those. I got to read them all this week. Actually, I had some extra time and read every single one of them, and some great answers in there. This was a good question, and I loved y'all's answers to it. Seeing moments of kindness in stories is always really fun for me, especially after reading Cormac McCarthy.
Oh, God. Yeah. Wow. It's great. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. As far as next week goes, for those of you that maybe are on this ride for the very first time with us, after we finish a book, we usually have one more episode where we cover it. We call it an overview episode, in which we sometimes get a little bit lost in the trees when we're getting into the minute details of these chapters. So we like to do one final episode where we look at the book as a whole. And so that's what we'll be doing on our episode next week. But as part of that, we also always do a mailbag episode where we just, get comments and questions from y'all and read them and answer them on the show. So that's what we're doing next week. So make sure you send your questions in. You can put your questions in the same place you answer our questions, and we will answer as many of them as we possibly can. They could be about anything, right? I mean, certainly if you want to talk about The Shining, well, let's talk about The Shining. If you want to talk about King more broadly, let's do that. If you just have some random freaking questions for us, we try to get those answered too.
Yeah. We always have fun with that. It's a little bit less restrictive than the usual format.
Yeah, it's much, much looser, less scripted, although these are barely scripted, but less structured, I guess is the right word, episode.
Yeah.
But so send those questions in. We usually record, by the way, on a Tuesday evening. So if you get your questions in before Tuesday evening next week, we will get to as many of them as we can on the episode.
That's right.
All right, but that is it for us here on Kingslingers. As we mentioned, next week is our overview at the Overlook, because we're talking about The Shining for one last time.
That's right. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod, or you can head on over to the subreddit at r/doofmedia. As usual, instead of answering the discussion question, you'll just leave your mailbag questions on that same weekly thread that we post there.
Yeah, and make sure you're subscribed to Kingslingers. We will be moving into night shift in just a few weeks, and you don't want to miss it. So subscribe to us anywhere you can find podcasts. Note about night shift as we wrap up, Matt. We're getting reports from people that for some reason the audiobook of night shift is broken up weirdly to where there's not one audiobook you can buy that has all the stories in it. It's like broken up into different books that have different stories. So just be warned, if you're planning on audiobooking like Matt is, it's going to be complicated.
All right. Looking forward to the complexity of it.
Yeah.
If you like any of our shows and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patrons, Glenn G and Mr. G, who are two different people.
Yeah.
And, we hope y'all enjoy the cool stuff we have over there, including this week's, our most recent episode of Other Levels of the Tower, where we discussed the adaptation, quote unquote, adaptation of Stephen King's Lawnmower Man, which was just a really fun conversation.
And of course, Mr. G, as we all know, is the director of the FBI. So thank you, Mr. G-Man, for supporting us. Matt, we can now officially say the director of the FBI supports our
Thank God. Podcast. Finally.
I don't actually know who the current head of the FBI is.
I don't either.
Let's look it up.
I think that's the way they like it.
It's a man named Christopher Wray.
Wow. I already forgot the name that you just said.
The FBI is not a secret organization, Matt.
You sure?
That's the one that's not secret.
Oh, okay.
All right. Of course, if you cannot afford to donate, like Mr. Poor Mr. G is like, I'm not the head of the FBI. What the fuck?
What the fuck? The fuck are you guys talking about?
Like G-Man.
Yeah, I got it.
I just felt like people might not have got it.
No,
so
that.
It was probably my best work, actually. But if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing us all over social media. Follow us on social media, by the way. I think we're running a contest for the rest of the month.
We are running
a trivia contest, right?
We're running, I don't know about the rest of the month. We're running a trivia contest, and we're going to be giving away a copy of The Shining to the winner of that contest.
I think it's a nice copy of The Shining. Don't quote me on that, but I think it is.
Yeah, it better be.
We're in charge of this, Matt.
Oh, shit. Yeah, it'll be a nice copy of The Shining.
Yeah. So to participate in that, we're doing a terrible job at this. Let's just wrap up the show. Follow us on social media. Come back next week as we wrap up our episode on The Shining. We'll see you then. We're very tired. I apologize for this outro. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.